Let's talk about the word er. Er is one of those Dutch words that has multiple meanings that you hear all the time, but you might not know what it's used for. Let's talk about one of these uses today, and that is er combined with a preposition. When you speak, usually you try to avoid repetition. For example, you wouldn't say, "It rains a lot in the Netherlands, but I'm used to the rain." Instead, you would say something like, "It rains a lot in the Netherlands, but I'm used to it." It here takes the place of something that you talked about earlier. You can use it to avoid repetition. In Dutch, we do the exact same thing with the word het. We also use het to refer to something else that we've talked about before. For example, when you're talking about the movie you saw last night or the event you went to, you can just say, "Het was leuk," and then het refers to whatever you did last night. This is something you've already talked about, so you don't need to repeat it again. Now, in English, you can always just use it. In Dutch, however, it's a little more tricky. You can't always simply use het. For example, after a preposition, you cannot use het. For example, aan, op, onder, voor, in, these are prepositions, and you can never say simply in het or aan het. For example, imagine you're on the phone and somebody asks you if you're already at the shop, and you can say, "Yes, I'm standing in front of it." Here you could say in front of it to refer to in front of the shop. Well, in Dutch, you can't simply use het. You cannot say, "Ja, ik sta voor het," because voor het is not something that you can say in Dutch. You cannot use a preposition plus het on its own. Instead of het, after a preposition in Dutch, you have to use er. Does that mean you can just say, "Ik sta voor er"? No. Unfortunately, it's not that simple, but it's almost that simple. Instead, you have to switch them around and you say, "Ja, ik sta ervoor." And ervoor becomes one word. You fuse er plus the preposition and it becomes ervoor. And this works with any preposition, so you can say eronder, erin, erachter, ervoor, erdoor, ertussen, any preposition you want. By the way, if you need some help with prepositions, I've made a video about this which you can watch by clicking the link up here. Okay, now let's practice. Let's take a few example sentences and replace the object by it, or by in this case. Let's start with, "Ik kijk naar het programma." I watched the show. Now, if we've already talked about the show before, and you want to say that you watch it, then you can just say it instead of the show, or in this case, het or How do we know if we need to use het or Well, we have kijken naar het programma. Naar het programma. Naar is a preposition, so you cannot say ik kijk naar het. Naar het is not correct in Dutch. Instead, you have to say And remember, we put before the preposition and we write them together, so we get ik kijk ernaar. Ik kijk ernaar. I watch it. Let's do another one. Let's take hij zit op jouw trui. Hij zit op jouw trui. He's sitting on your sweater. If you've been looking for your sweater and you're wondering where it is, you don't need to say the sweater all over again because the subject has been established. So if you just want to say he's sitting on it, then in Dutch you can use het or Well, in this case we need to use because we're talking about on. He's sitting on the sweater, op de trui, and op is a preposition, so you have to use So here this becomes hij zit erop. Hij zit erop. He's sitting on it. Let's do one more. Ik moet aan mijn kaartje denken. I have to remember to bring my ticket, or I have to remember my ticket. Denken aan means to remember or to think about in Dutch. Now notice that aan is a preposition. So if we want to replace het kaartje by it, then we cannot use het because aan is a preposition. We have to use Ik moet eraan denken. Ik moet eraan denken. Now it's your turn. Let's practice. How would you say, you are standing on it? You are standing on it. Notice that on is a preposition. So in Dutch, you cannot use het. You have to use So let me give you the answer. Je staat erop. Je staat erop. You're standing on it. Okay, let's take this to the next level. But you should only keep watching if you've already seen my video on word order in Dutch. If not, you can click the link up here. Because in order to understand the next part, you have to know where the different elements go in the Dutch sentence. So far, and the preposition have always stayed together. We've even written them as one word. However, we have one problem, because in Dutch, words always like to go in a very specific position in the sentence. And the word really likes to come really early in the sentence, even before the time, so after the verb, but before the time. However, the preposition likes to come all the way at the end of the sentence. The only thing that comes after the preposition is the second verb, if there is more than one verb in the sentence. So what does this mean for our plus preposition? Well, I'm afraid they'll just have to split up. They'll have to go for a long-distance relationship. Like I said, goes before the time, and the preposition goes at the end of the sentence, but before the second verb. Let's go back to our first example. Ik kijk naar het programma. What if we want to add altijd, always? I always watch the show. Then we get ik kijk altijd naar het programma. Now, what if we want to substitute het programma by it, or het or In this case, we've seen that we need to use because naar het is not correct. We have to say ernaar. Ik kijk ernaar. Where do we put altijd? Well, like I said, likes to come before the time, but after the verb, and the preposition likes to come at the end of the sentence. Here we only have one verb, so we can just put it at the very end of the sentence. So what we get in the end is ik kijk altijd naar. Ik kijk altijd naar. I always watch it. Let's do the same with our second example. Hij zit op je trui. What if we want to add that he's still sitting on your sweater? He hasn't moved and he's still sitting right there on top of it. Then we add nog steeds, still. Where do we put this in a sentence? Well, hij zit erop becomes hij zit nog steeds op. Hij zit er nog steeds op. He's still sitting on top of it. Like we've seen before, wants to come right after the verb, but before the time. So, hij zit nog steeds op. Op likes to come at the end of the sentence, and there's only one verb here, so we don't need to worry about anything else. We just put it at the end of the sentence. Let's do the same with our third example. Ik moet aan mijn kaartje denken. Ik moet eraan denken. What if we want to add tomorrow, morgen? I have to remember it tomorrow. Well, morgen is the time, like we've seen before. Likes to come before the time. But then we have to put the preposition at the end of the sentence. Now here we have two verbs, moet and denken. So the preposition has to come before the second verb, denken. So the end result is ik moet morgen aan denken. Ik moet morgen aan denken. I have to remember it tomorrow. Okay, now you try. How would you say, I never listen to it? I never listen to it. Well, I listen is ik luister. To it would be naar het, but we cannot say naar het because naar is a preposition. So we have to use ernaar. Ik luister ernaar would be I listen to it, or am listening to it. But we also have to add never, nooit. Well, then we have to remember that likes to come before the time and after the verb. So, ik luister nooit naar. Naar wants to come at the end of the sentence. We only have one verb here, so we can just put it at the end. Ik luister nooit naar. I never listen to it. Let's change it a little bit. How would you say, I don't want to listen to it? I don't want to listen to it. Well, this one's a little bit trickier because we have two verbs, wil and luisteren. But if you follow the rules, it's pretty easy. So how would you say it? The answer is, ik wil niet naar luisteren. Ik wil niet naar luisteren. I don't want to listen to it. So comes after the first verb and before the time. There's no time here, so just after the first verb. Ik wil And then where do we put naar? Well, naar comes at the end of the sentence, but before the second verb, luisteren. So, ik wil niet naar luisteren. Now let's add even more elements to the sentence to see if you really got it. How would you say, I want to listen to it tonight with my friends? I want to listen to it tonight with my friends. Maybe you should pause the video and think about this one. Maybe write it down. I'll give you the answer now. Ik wil vanavond met mijn vrienden naar luisteren. Ik wil vanavond met mijn vrienden naar luisteren. I want to listen to it tonight with my friends. If you analyze it, you'll see that everything is exactly where you would expect it to be. Comes after the verb, but before the time. So, ik wil and then vanavond, the time. Then we've seen that other elements like met mijn vrienden come after the time. Ik wil vanavond met mijn vrienden. And then we get naar because luisteren is the second verb. So we have to put the preposition naar before the second verb. Ik wil vanavond met mijn vrienden naar luisteren. So there you have it. That's one of the uses of There's a little more to say about this topic, and I'll come back to that in another video, but I think this will do for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was useful to you. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for your support on Patreon. Bye-bye!